this computer. Okay, so here we go. So pleasant good day. We'll be looking at the digestive system for the day. And in terms of the digestive system, is it important? Oh yeah, very important in terms of extracting nutrients, and from these nutrients, they're in turn broken down to give energy in the form of ATP, which is the universal currency that is used throughout the body. So the digestive system is critical, and we'll have a look at it in terms of what is actually done in the digestive system. So just asking, just for reference purposes, you all are seeing the slides, yes?
Yes, sir, we are seeing the
Okay,
slide.
excellent.
Yes, sir.
Okay, here we go.
Yes, sir. We see.
Okay, great. Here we go. So it's obvious that we are what we eat. And in terms of what is extracted from the food that we eat, we get nutrients, macronutrients, which are the larger ones, namely carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Lipids sometimes, of course, called fats. And then we have the micronutrients. These micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. And vitamins and minerals, they're indeed quite important, because some of these minerals and vitamins, they are utilized in terms of catalysts for different type of metabolic reactions. So let's see in terms of what goes on next. All right. Let me see. Okay, somebody has, let me just see if I can mute all the mics. I know, here's the key mute all. Okay. Okay. So when we're thinking of food, what the breakdown of food is, it is measured in terms of calories. And calories, by definition, as shown here, it's a measure of the heat required to raise the temperature. Ideally, for our perspective, calories is defined as a unit of energy of what is extracted from food. And some of us might be aware, in terms of different foods have different calorie or calorific values. So therefore we get different energy amounts or energy quantities from different types of food. Of course, chief among them, as we will see, fats deliver the most bang for your buck. You get the most possible energy in terms of per gram, you get them from fats. And we'll see that in a little while in terms of how that actually occurs. So these are the macronutrients which we did mention. Glucose, galactose, and fructose, these are the building blocks. And in terms of glucose, they join together in two, when you have two of them joining together to form a disaccharide. So therefore you have a monosaccharide forming a disaccharide, and this disaccharide with glucose is known as maltose, with galactose is known as lactose, and fructose is known as sucrose. These are disaccharides, right? So when we look at lactose consists of glucose and galactose, and then sucrose consists of glucose and fructose. And then of course these disaccharides in and of themselves could then polymerize or form further groupings, which are known as polysaccharides, right? And these polysaccharides are known as glycogen, starch, and different types of fibers, all right? So very important there. So which is why when you think about starches, polysaccharides, if for instance, if you take a Crix, and some of us like Vital Supplies Crix, if you take Crix or some other carbohydrate-based biscuit and you put it on your tongue and leave it for a sufficient length of time, the action of salivary amylase, which is present in your saliva, begins to break it down. And even though with Crix, it does have a bit of a salty taste, if you leave it for a while, it actually starts to taste sweet. And the reason that happens is because the polysaccharide is being broken down to disaccharides and ultimately into monosaccharides, into sugars. And that's why something that normally doesn't have a sweet taste will have a sweet taste after a while. You can give it a try. When you go home, take out your little Crix. The reason why you use Crix, because Crix has a rather bland taste. So therefore you could detect the formation of the sugar. So if you use a sweet biscuit, even though that does happen as well, you will not be able to detect the sugar because, well, it is loaded with sugar in and of itself. So that's why Crix works better. Put it on your tongue, leave it for a while, and the action of your saliva will indeed start to make it taste the sugary sugars that are present. Okay, So these are the macronutrients. And very interestingly, in terms of one of the major macronutrients, which is found in meats that we eat, of course, proteins. Proteins are nothing more than an amalgam or a set of amino acids which are put together. These amino acids, we have 20 known or recognized amino acids, and these 20 amino acids, they are polymerized by a dehydration type reaction, which means that water is removed from one of the carboxylic ends of the amino acid, and the amide or amine end, you have the removal of water leading to the formation of an amide linkage, which is NH2. And as this NH2 causes the linkages of the amino acids into this chain, right? So here, for instance, we see the amine group, which has a NH2, right? And the carboxylic group, C double bond OOH. So which is why an amino acid is called an amino acid. It has an amine group and an acid group. So what happens, if you were to use a bit of imagination, if you had this carboxylic end over here from another amino acid, this OH from the other amino acid combines with this H and it drops off. So this is known as a dehydration reaction because you're removing the water. So what is left when you move this off, you have a C double bond O and H linkage here. And that is known as the amide linkage. And that is what links amino acids together, that amide linkage. Okay, so proteins, we looked at proteins. They're made up of amino acids linked together. And now you have lipids. And lipids, here we're looking at a triglyceride. And in this triglyceride, what we're looking at is 2 saturated fatty acids and 1 unsaturated fatty acid. It is so-called unsaturated because saturation means that means full of. So therefore, when you're unsaturated, it means, well, you could do it some more, or you're not full. When we look at the bond associated with this unsaturated fatty acid, if you notice all of these others, they're filled with hydrogen. This carbon, because of its valency of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it is saturated. All of the possible bonds are taken up. But when you look at glycerol, what you have here, hello jello, this C is double bonded to a C. So this is a point of unsaturation. So even though you do have 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds, but it's not saturated with hydrogen. Hence the reason glycerol is known as an unsaturated fatty acid, because of the fact it doesn't have its full complement of hydrogen. All right, so the types of fat. So what types of fat do we have? Well, we have saturated fats, one to which no more hydrogen atoms could be added. For instance, you have single bonds, CH2, in which it is filled up, and these tend to be dense and solid at room temperature. Can anybody think of any fats that are solid at room temperature? Anybody knows of any?
The butter.
Butter, yes, yes. So the most part, butter is solid at room temperature. That is quite correct, right? So that's saturated fats. Unsaturated, one that can accept more hydrogen. And then, of course, we have the trans and omega fatty acids. So these are different classes or classifications of classifications of these different fats. All right, let's move on to the other one in terms of the calorific or the energy values associated with these macronutrients. And as we mentioned, fat has the greatest calorific or energy value. So the amount of energy you could gain from it, right? Fat is you could get the most from fat. Protein, you get 4 calories, whereas carbohydrates, you also get 4. So protein and carbohydrates, they are about on the same level, but fats, as you can see, almost double the amount. So probably this is one of the reasons for those of us who eat things, right? Fats are delicious. Yum, 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 yum. Think about it, right? Things which you usually associate with having a delicious taste, right? They usually have fats in them. Could I get some examples? Things which have fat in them that taste delicious. Anybody would like to share something that tastes delicious that has fat in it?
So fried chicken.
Fried chicken. Think about fried chicken as opposed to boiled chicken. Right? Look at the difference. Yum, 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 yum. Something on which KFC and Royal Castle have built their empires upon because of we have that yearning for that fried taste. Anything else? Something that has, fats in it. That's something that goes along with stew chicken, red beans and rice, and potato salad on
Avocado.
avocado. Yeah, avocado does have a good bit of fat in it. Yes. Anything else? What goes along with stew chicken, rice, and
And
vegetable on Sunday lunch? Red beans. Well,
pork.
Macaroni pie.
Macaroni
thank
pie.
you. Macaroni pie.
Macaroni pie.
Right? And when you think about it, macaroni pie, one of the chief components with macaroni
Cheese.
pie, cheese, quite right. Cheese, yum, yum, calories, right? And that's why it tastes delicious. So, yeah. So, one of the things, associated with these fats, you often you probably ask yourself, how are these things moved around within the body itself? And what is the role of, the different organs within the body that actually move these things around? So lipoproteins, when we think about lipoproteins, you have four major ways in terms how they are moved around in the blood. They are moved around either as chylomicrons, VLDLs, which is the LDL, VLDL, LDL, and HDL, high density lipoproteins, low density lipoproteins, and very low density lipoproteins, right? So this is how they are moved around within the blood itself. They do provide the transport mechanism for lipids within the blood, and they transport cholesterol to organs and tissues. This cholesterol, of course, is important because it's needed for formation of things like red blood cell membranes. One of the things you might ask yourself in this era or age of healthiness, how could we lower our cholesterol? Well, one of the ways which has been proven, notwithstanding all of the drugs on the market that has many claims to this fame, but fruits could help lower cholesterol because they contain a soluble protein known as pectin. So, very importantly, not only do fruits taste good, but they are also very good in terms of lowering your cholesterol. We have to be careful. And now, of course, why is it we have to be careful in terms of not eating too many fruits? Anybody would like to share? Even though it is healthy for you, what risk could you possibly run if you eat too many fruits?
Sugar.
So
Yeah.
diabetes.
Yes, yes, yes. You're thinking, I hear what you're thinking. Yes. So sugar, because these fruits usually have a good amount of sugar. But the thing about eating fruit, sugar within fruits, as opposed to, let's say, sugar as we know it, a pound of sugar or granulated sugar, is there a difference in terms of, let's say, if you make a glass of juice, and you sweeten it with sugar and you drink that, as opposed to eating fruits in terms of the same sugar content?
Undiluted.
Is it a difference? Yes, it has to do with dilution. It also has to do with that fiber. You see, one of the important things, when it reaches down into your stomach, in terms of how it is absorbed, one, and throughout your GI tract, you have to remember when you do eat things like fruit, it has fiber associated with it, and the fiber acts like a bit of a sponge. So, in terms of the release of the sugar, is like slow released. So, therefore, in terms of raising your blood sugar levels, it will do so slower than if you drink, let's say, a glass of juice, a glass of orchard, or anything like that, something that is pre-sweetened. Once you drink that, it is very readily absorbed into your bloodstream very quickly. So therefore, if you're looking at eating fruits with a certain sugar content, and then you're looking at a glass of juice with the same sugar content, and you were to measure the sugar content in your blood, one of the things you'll see a spike with a glass of juice, but you'll see a gradual increase with the fruit because of the fact it has that digestive component to it. And that's one of the great things associated with eating fruits. While yes, you will see a rise in the sugar, but it would take a longer time. So if you ever have an option, eat the fruits. Yeah, so it is a lot healthier for you. And notwithstanding that, as we have seen here, the presence of pectin, very importantly, also has a role in terms of lowering cholesterol in the blood itself. All right, so there are two other pathways associated with lipoproteins. I'll just mention them. It's not on the syllabus. It's the exogenous and the endogenous pathways, right? The exogenous uses chylomicrons, and the endogenous pathway relates to the liver. So the one shown here is really the endogenous pathway, and what it does, um, this shows um, how the fats are actually processed. Now, one of the important things with the liver in terms of its function, it stores fats, right? The liver cells or the hepatocytes, they do have the ability to store fat within themselves, store glycerol and fats. And very importantly, for those of us who, for instance, like to eat, I don't know if anybody here eats organ meat, liver in particular, right? You'd find that when you do cook liver, it does taste delicious. And you're wondering, why does it taste delicious? And it really has a lot to do with the presence of fat that is associated with the liver itself. Some persons might have heard, if you watch some of those shows, foie gras, something which is known as, which in essence is fatty duck liver, and it tastes absolutely delicious. Yum, yum, yum. And the reason why is because of the present, as the name implies, foie gras, it's a fatty duck liver, right? So they take that and not much cooking, and it tastes very, very delicious. But usually in cooking, there's a direct correlation between fat and deliciousness. And maybe it has to do with the fact that as we have seen, fat gives the most amount of energy per gram in terms of calorific energy. So therefore, that might have been an adaptation by your body to recognize fats as being delicious, as in terms of taking in fats, because yes, it would provide you with more energy than any of these others. So even to this day, now that while we are no longer hunter-gatherers in terms of going out there to find our food, but to this day, still within your chromosomes, in terms of genes that have been passed along to you, it still tells you fat is delicious. So therefore, you actively seek out things which do have oil in them, such as chips and all the like. Okay. All right. So, of course, when this fat is transported in the blood itself, it goes to the different cells. So, liver, very importantly, via the HDL, LDL, and VLDL, it packages them, sends them through to all around the body itself in terms of delivery mechanism. The chylomicrons, they are recirculated and they are brought back to the liver in terms of for them to be filled once again to be sent on their way. But very importantly, in terms of the liver, in terms of delivering all of these fats to different parts of the body, that is one of the mechanisms that they use. And of course, in particular, the cells which are most receptive to the fats which are sent along in the bloodstream will be, of course, adipose tissue and certain muscle cells as well. Okay, let's go forward. Right, so this mentioned the healthy eating pyramid, right? Tells you the good things to eat and in what quantities that you should eat them. So at your leisure, do have a look at them. Of course, what it says, daily exercise and weight control, vegetables and fruits, going up the nuts and seeds, dairy, and sparingly red meat and butter, right? Refined grains and the like. All right, so refined grains, yeah, everything is sparingly. So always do remember when in terms of eating, everything in moderation. That should be a motto, everything in moderation. Always remember that. Okay, so let's talk. We spoke about proteins, we spoke about sugars, we spoke about fats. Now let's speak about the gastrointestinal system. So the GI tract, of course, goes all the way from mouth to anus and consists of accessory organs. The accessory organs associated with the GI tract are the salivary glands, teeth, tongue, liver, gallbladder, pancreas. So the pancreas not only has a role in terms of distribution of hormones, right, insulin, but it also has a digestive role as well. Gallbladder in terms of secreting bile, which emulsifies fat, right? And of course, once everything is absorbed in the small intestine, large intestine, particularly important for the absorption of water, which is why when your stools come out, they do come out not watery, but they come out firm, because you have, during its passage through the large intestine, you have removed most of the water itself. So therefore you have non-watery stools. You do, however, have watery stools when you have diarrhea, right? Some people might have experienced diarrhea. Anybody here ever experienced diarrhea with watery stools? Yes? Not a pleasant topic to talk about, I agree, but sometimes it does happen. If, for instance, you left something on the counter in the morning and you rush to work, rush to school, then you come back in the afternoon, right, and you see it again, and what do? You smell it. I wonder if it's still good, boy. And you smell it again. Usually, when you smell food twice, it usually is not a good sign, right? Usually, when you smell it twice, throw it in the bin. But you know, you're still, okay, let me go for it. And you eat it. And what happens? Within a half hour or so, you feel, oh, stomach start to tumble. You have to go to the porcelain throne. And then you have watery stools, right? Right? And you're spraying all over the bowl. And then that is usually quite distressing to the body itself in terms of having these watery stools. And the reason why you have the watery stools is because the gut bacteria in the large intestines, they are affected by the toxins which are present, the microbial infection which has occurred on that bit of food which you have ingested. Now they have gone past the stomach and they have entered into your intestinal region. They reach the large intestine, and the bacteria which coexist in the large intestine and are responsible for assisting in the absorption of water. Now they are affected, can't do their jobs. So therefore, the water passes on, and therefore you have watery stools, right? With that spraying effect that you get within your toilet bowl. So therefore, whenever you do see watery stools, that is a sign that, yeah, more likely than not, you had some type of food poisoning to some extent. And one of the ways to improve upon that, or to help it out, getting electrolytes, because in the body itself, in terms of from a functional perspective, once you lose water, salt follows. And when you lose salt, salt is very important, as you would have seen in SNF1, for the proper functioning of the nervous system. And therefore, when your nervous system begins to shut down in terms of generation of action potentials, all that, in terms of the membranes, when you look at the axon hillock, where you have those sodium gates opening and sodium rushing in, depolarizing the membrane and generating the action potential, which rushes along the axon. When it reaches the muscle, causes contraction, and now you're able to move, right? Once that is shut down, what do you have happening? Well, none of those things are happening. So you feel lethargic, which is why when you do have diarrhea or you do have food poisoning, you feel so weak, because literally your muscles are not functioning because you have lost salt in your watery watery stools. So it's always important whenever you do have diarrhea, not only to check for water, and you will see this in your professional career as well. Not only do you have to adjust for water, but you also have to adjust for those electrolytes. Yeah, very important. So one of the good things could be taken for diarrhea, of course, is coconut water. Coconut water is loaded with electrolytes because that's food for the developing plant, right? So it's loaded with electrolytes. Electrolytes are nothing more than salts and something that carries a charge, either a positive or a negative charge, right? So salt, for instance, that's a good electrolyte. And you would find that within coconut water. So whenever you feel dehydrated, while water is good, always remember, put in a little bit of salt in the water and dissolve it and drink it. That is even better. And what is probably even best is coconut water. If you can't get that, well, Gatorade is a nice substitute. Yeah? All right. Let's go forward. All right. So here from the gastrointestinal system, of course, things come in the mouth. You chew it up, yum, yum, yum. It's pushed down by the tongue. It comes down your esophagus, down to your stomach. From the stomach, it goes into the small intestine, then the large intestine, small intestine to the large intestine, and then the remnants are expelled through the anus. Okay, so the peritoneum. So what exactly is the peritoneum? Somebody would like to help me out? What is your peritoneum? Well, your peritoneum is this area which is enclosed, usually around the abdominal region. It is enclosed within a specific cavity, and that is very important. So when you're looking, when you do remove the skin under the adipose layer, you will see a peritoneal layer. So if you look here, for instance, you see the stomach is enclosed within this peritoneal membrane, and here we are seeing an overhead view. This membrane, the membrane totally encloses the peritoneal cavity, and within the cavity itself you have all of your organs. So here's your liver in section, your pancreas, stomach, and the large and small intestine. So your peritoneum really is a protective covering for all of those organs which exist within the abdominal region. All right. And let's speak now. We're going down the gastrointestinal tract. Let's speak a little bit more to the how absorption occurs. So all along the digestive tract, you do have a mucosa. Now, the mucosa does consist of simple squamous epithelium, which lines the inner part of the digestive tract. Very importantly, because it does add protection and it also allows for the diffusion of nutrients into the bloodstream, which is ultimately very important because these nutrients have to go throughout the body after eating. Associated with the GI tract as well, you also have nerves. So this is why, for instance, when you do eat food, you do get the sensation of a certain amount of fullness, let's say within the stomach, because it does stretch. And when it does stretch in terms of impulses being sent from the stomach, it is sent to the brain and it is perceived as fullness. So you do have nerves associated with the stomach level, with the stomach itself. So in terms of the digestive functions, what happens? Well, first of all, you have ingestion or taking in of food, secretion. You have secretion from numerous organs and also all along the GI tract. You do have those goblet cells which secrete mucus, which allows for the smooth passage of things down your large and small intestine all the way to the anus itself. Digestion, you have the breaking down of the food for the extraction of the nutrients. And of course, they are moved along and we'll see it in a little bit. You have different types of motions, but they are moved along in terms of the food because that is very important. Else, if we didn't have this motility or the moving along of the food, every time you eat, everything would just stay in your stomach. The nutrients are then absorbed. Also, not only nutrients, as we mentioned, large intestine, the major nutrient that is absorbed is water. And once that is finished, you do have defecation occurring. All right. So this is just showing, for instance, in terms of a burger being eaten, what happens when you reach down, you do have secretion of enzymes. Let's say if you're looking at the stomach itself, in the stomach, you have the chief cells. They secrete pepsinogen, this inactive form of pepsin. And of course, the pepsin breaks down proteins into amino acids. That is very important. Also present there, you have the parietal cells, and these parietal cells, they do secrete gastric acid, and it's these said gastric acid that turn pepsinogen into its active form pepsin. And this pepsin now is able to break down the food. So that's very important that within the stomach, you do have these two separate cells. One secretes pepsinogen, other one the acid, and the acid activates the pepsinogen, right? And now it is able to break down the food. And that is very important because if that did not occur, what you would have happening is that when you have, if pepsin in its active form were to be secreted in the stomach itself, what you would have happening is the stomach being digested by itself. Right, it would actually start to break down those proteins present in the stomach wall. All right, so that's very important. And certain instances that does occur where you do have the pepsin or the gastric acid present actually beginning to make a hole in the stomach wall. Anybody knows what is that called?
Ulcers.
Oh, you had that waiting. You had that in the chamber, and you're just waiting for me. You had it there, and pooh, very good. It is indeed ulcers. Anybody here ever had an ulcer or knew of someone who had an ulcer? Well, one of the major things with ulcers is pain, right? Because as you can imagine, right, that protective layer of mucus is not there. And of course, you're attacking your stomach. So it begins to get rather painful in terms of the acid attacking the stomach itself. Okay, let's go forward. All right, so we mentioned the GI tract, gastrointestinal properties. Now let's talk about the movement of that food. Right, peristalsis is a movement, a wave-like contraction occurs along the GI tract that moves food down in a bolus or this little ball of food. So you have a sequential contraction and release, and it moves it down, moves it all along the GI tract, very important. Then you also have segmentation, another one, which is really a circular muscle contraction, kind of like a corkscrew, and it moves it down, move things down as well in terms of within the digestive tract itself. So we spoke about the movement along, we spoke about some of the rudimentary digestion which exists in the stomach. Let's take a step back and see what happens when food actually enters the mouth itself. Well, of course, starting from the tooth, here you see tooth, very important that you keep it in good order to prevent dental caries from occurring or cavities. All right, so how do we keep healthy teeth? Anybody? Somebody help me out on that one. What are some of the things we could do to maintain good teeth? What could we do?
Brush your teeth regularly.
Brush your teeth regularly, yes. Anything else? Danielle, you have something?
Go to the dentist.
Go to the dentist, yes. Checkups, right? Very good. Anything else?
Stay away from sweets.
Stay away from too much sweets, yes. And you know, today is Halloween, which is really an Americanized holiday, which has been transported to the Caribbean itself. Anybody here going and dress up like Jumbie later and run around bawling, trick or treat, give me something nice to eat by people's door? Or carrying the
No,
children?
sir, COVID is real.
COVID is real, I hear you. If you look on the networks, however, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, over any states, because down here it's not as entrenched as a holiday. So, you know, it's just like, well, we could stay home and so on. But over there, it's something that is entrenched in their culture, and people like to pass on, you know, things because they remember how it was for me as a child. So, you know, I want to pass it on, you know, to my children and so on. So if you look on the news, you will see that, yes, there will be parents carrying their children around. And to answer that question in terms of COVID being real, interestingly, I saw some novel ways that people to limit contact. You know, some persons, what they've decided to do is put out, you know, this candy, let's say by the road, you know, in a container, as opposed to avoid physical contact with persons where that is concerned. So it'll be interesting enough to see, you know, the different mechanisms, how people dealing with this whole COVID issue, notwithstanding the whole issue with the masks itself. Everybody's been following up on what is happening with COVID, yes? I wouldn't speak too much to that, but of course we know that come November the 3rd, which is Tuesday, it's election over in the US. And depending on who is elected, either the Democrat or the Republican, that will influence policy regarding COVID. So indirectly, it does affect us, right? So do take note of what is happening over there, you know, in terms of those elections, because the outcome of that election would have a trickle-down effect to us within the Caribbean itself. Let's go forward. So the tooth, as mentioned, to prevent dental caries, practice good oral hygiene, brush your teeth, floss often, and visit your dentist. These are the different parts of your tooth. And very interesting to note from a pathological perspective. Let's say if they find a skeleton X number of years on in terms of a pathologist, and this has to do with identification of the subject itself. How do they identify it? Is the tooth. They usually look for teeth, because within the teeth, if you look here, you see that there's a pulp. And this pulp, because it is encased in enamel, which is very hard, this usually remains intact a good couple months after death. So one of the things they could do, if they do find just the skeletal remains, and in terms of identification of the person, they could take the teeth, drill through the enamel down to the pulp, take that pulp, do a DNA extraction, and then look to sequence it. And then they could do let's say, run that against a database of missing persons where, let's say, some relatives have contributed DNA. So they could look to see if they could get a match in that regard. So teeth are very important in terms of identification of subjects for whom, let's say, you don't know, no ID card, no facial recognition because of all the, let's say, tissue has been removed, or let's say advanced decomposition, or let's say dismemberment of the remains by animals and so on. But you have found teeth, right? You could actually do identification, DNA identification, by extraction of DNA from the pulp of the tooth. Okay. So salivary glands, next thing we want to look at. So here we have salivary glands. How many pairs of salivary glands do we have? Somebody want to help me out? How many pairs do we have? Salivary glands. Do we have any salivary glands?
Sir, is it 2 pairs?
2 pairs. What are they? The submandibular gland and the sublingual gland, and we also have the parotid gland. So from this image, we'll see that there are 3 pairs. But quite recently, as recent as October the 16th, in the Journal of Radiotherapy and Oncology, there was mention of the identification of a new set of salivary glands in the nasopharynx region. So the nasopharynx, that's where your nasal cavity meets the, well, just below the oral cavity. So the pharyngeal is the lower cavity there, where it just meets the nasal and the pharyngeal cavity meet. So as the nasopharyngeal region, they have found a new set of salivary glands, which are known as the tubercle glands. All right, so in essence now there's a 4th pair which has been discovered as recently as a fortnight ago in the nasopharyngeal region of the head itself. And interestingly, it was found by accident. And you know, one of the things in science, lots of things happen by accident. Right. So in this case, the person wasn't even looking for a pair of glands, but they were using this new technique, and they were looking actually for cancerous tissue. And what he found out when they used this new technique, you know, he saw this this particular image being, you know, coming up on the not a particular image, sorry, but a particular structure coming up in the image that was revealed. And he was like, this is odd. And they realized it was not cancerous. And then he did a check on other images which were brought up previously on other patients. And they found that consistently this structure was there. So, you know, they did some further testing and they found out, oh my God, it's not cancerous, but instead it's indeed a gland which is present. And so, of course, they rushed to publish it in the Journal of Radiotherapy and Oncology, right, announcing that yes, indeed, we have found a new pair of salivary glands, right? And a lot of things do happen, you know, by accident in science. So one of the things you always have to remember, scientists are not necessarily good looking, sorry, but they are indeed good lookers. So in other words, they look at things with a discerning eye. You know, when you look at something, look critically at it, right? And don't just look and see for what it is. Okay, let's go forward. 3 pairs, and only a fortnight ago they discovered a 4th pair. Do remember that. So in terms of the swallowing process, what happens, right? This goes through the entire process, right? When you swallow, and sometimes, let's say if you do get a question on this in an exam, you know, okay, what is the swallowing process? And you're like, I really can't remember that. All you have to do is just do it yourself, you know, and you know, follow what is happening as it goes along. So in this case, in terms of this shows what happens with the pharynx in terms of the swallowing process, right? Step 1, in terms of first the thing is pushed, the food is made into a bolus or this little rounded shaped object, right? The nasopharynx closes off, the oropharynx opens up because the food has to go down. In step 2, the esophagus moves up even further, right? And the tongue pushes food to the back, right? And of course, most critically, the epiglottis covers the larynx. What would happen if the epiglottis did not cover the larynx? What would happen? A very simple thing would happen. If the epiglottis didn't cover Aliyah, what would happen?
Food would go down. Well, food will go down in the larynx.
Right. You know, very good. You know how the old people often would tell you how what don't speak and talk, eat at the same time. They knew exactly what they were talking about, because when you speak and eat at the same time, your epiglottis could get confused, because one of the things when you are speaking, the epiglottis covers the passage to your esophagus, and when you are eating, well, when you are eating, it covers the passage to your trachea. So if you're eating and talking at the same time, it'll be moving back and forth, and sometimes you could get food going down your trachea into your lungs. And what happens if food does go down into your trachea? I think we did mention this when we were speaking about respiration. What happens if food goes down your trachea? What reflex action is triggered? If food gets into your trachea, go down into your lungs, what reflex action? What happens? Miranda, what happens? You cough. You start a cough. You start a cough. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nikita was going to say the same thing. I applaud you, Nikita. Right? So you start a cough. And one of the reasons you cough is to bring those things up. Why is not a good idea to have food in your lungs? One word. It begins with I.
Infection.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Right? Infection. That's why you need to get that out, because infection, as you know, in the medical profession of which you are proud participants, that's a very bad word. Right? The worst word you can hear is infection. When you hear infection, you go, oh gosh. Right? So always remember that infection is a very bad word as it relates to the medical profession, right? So let me see if it won't be read mode on it. Yeah, it's a very bad word where that is concerned. Okay, let's go forward. Okay, so the stomach. So from the mouth, right, it goes down in this peristaltic wave into the stomach itself. The lower esophageal sphincter relaxes, and then the food comes in. Right, so it goes down into your stomach. Here it is, your stomach has muscular walls, an oblique, circular, and longitudinal layer, and it mixes up the food with the chyme, with the acids which are secreted, as we mentioned before, right? And it mixes it up, right? Mixes it up very properly, right? And then it's only after it mixes up with the HCl and the other digestive juices that the lower esophageal sphincter would open down here, or the lower esophageal or pyloric sphincter, and allow it to go through for further absorption and digestion. So interestingly, this upper esophageal sphincter, sometimes some persons have issues with it, particularly at night, and it doesn't work too well. So what does that mean? It remains open, so food could go in. And of course, if you're lying down and it goes up, right, you get this burning sensation in your mouth. And what is that known as? When digestive or acid chyme flows back up the esophagus, it's particularly at night when you're lying down. What is that known as? AR.
Acid reflux.
Thanks, Nikita. Acid reflux, right? And again, you get this burning. So how could you fix acid reflux? Could you fix it if you do have it?
Alkaline base things.
You could take in alkaline base to neutralize. I like how you're thinking, Danielle. Yes, that's one way. And of course, there are medications on the market that do that. What else could we do physically? Don't eat too late, right? So you wouldn't have things in your stomach late in the night. That is one way. And another thing is you could just prop the upper part of your bed, right? Prop it up so that you don't have this movement up into your mouth in terms of the contents.
Experience.
Yes, go ahead, Danielle.
Well, it's lying on your left side, no?
Lying on your left side. I can't say yay or nay. If somebody does have this condition and they try it and it works, by all means go with it. But I can't say offhand if lying on one side as opposed to the other. It's just I don't know. I just don't know. But it might work for some. Always do take note, different. One thing with medicine and one thing even with certain remedies, it works for some people and doesn't work for others. So if it does work for you, as an individual or for persons, power to them, right? So it might have some truth to that in terms of lying on your left side. But as of me, I just don't know. Not my area of speciality, gastrointestinal, things to do with the gastrointestinal region. But that's a very good question. Yeah. So another thing, piggybacking on this, let me ask this question. Why is it not a good idea to eat before you have any type of surgery, or let's say any type of surgery where anesthesia is given? Why is it not a good idea to eat based on that? Anybody could piggyback and give me a response. Why is it not a good idea to eat? Oftentimes they'll tell you, well, don't eat like 6 hours before the surgery or something like that. Why do they tell you that when they're going to apply anesthesia?
Take longer to absorb.
It takes longer to absorb in terms of the food. That could be a partial reason, yes, Nikita. There's another more compelling reason, and it has to do with the upper esophageal, with your two sphincters, the upper and the lower esophageal sphincters.
So I could be wrong, but isn't it, did it study like not to have anything because things like really muscle, the sphincter moving with it tends to come back up?
Yes, ping, ping, ping. You hit the nail on the head, Sabira. Exactly. Where the anesthesia, now you weren't too far away, Nikita, right? So I applaud you for putting forward that idea, right? One of the things with the anesthesia, it specifically targets muscles. It relaxes the upper esophageal sphincter and the lower esophageal sphincter. Now, if you could imagine, right, if they put you under and those muscles are relaxed and you have food in your stomach, what do you think will happen? Food will begin to flow. Now, imagine you lying down, right? And the food begins to flow up into your throat. Yeah, that could get rather tricky. You'll have to now suction it off. And I really don't want to do that. So literally, you could choke. And I think sometimes if they tell you that, they'll tell you that. And some people, when they get up in the morning, well, let me take a little tea. And when they take a little tea, well, I'll eat half. And amazing, a whole burger.
Yes, sir.
I'll eat half a burger. But if they tell you, look, you could suffocate to death on the operating table, I think a lot of people would take it a lot more seriously, where that is concerned. Right? So always remember to spread the knowledge, 2 persons you do encounter. That if they let them know, hey, dude, that muscle relax, everything is going to come back up and you could suffocate to death. And I think people might have a different approach to the entire thing. Let's go forward. Go ahead.
So this happened to us with the RN on the ward she was doing. She went to come to do surgery and to me, she's supposed to know better, and she eats. And in theater, she started cold because she started to choke.
And you see, sometimes, I think sometimes people don't they will tell you, okay, don't eat. And people don't realize the seriousness of it. So which is why, I think any logical-minded person, if they tell you, don't eat because you could choke to death on the operating table, I think people will view it a lot differently than when you just tell them, well, don't eat 6 hours. Some people think, well, I'll squeeze in a little something, right? So do remember, even in your professional career, what you could do as well is, when you are speaking to, persons, impress upon them that fact. Yeah. And the reason why you don't eat, because you could die, right? And I think you might get a different approach to it. Okay, let's go forward. So we just mentioned the stomach. Let's go in for a little more detail. So the stomach layers, the surface area is increased. Now, whenever you see folding occurring in the body, that increases surface area. Could you think of any other organ or surface that is folded so that you increase surface area? So we're looking at the stomach, the brain, yeah. That's why your brain is folded. And some people probably have more gyri. We'll see those gyri and so on, the folds, and maybe they're more brainy than others. Yeah, that'll be an interesting thing to see. Any other structure you could think that is folded? Well, the whole interior of the
intestine?
Yeah, very good. The intestine, yes. Right, in both the small and large, they're folded like this. And the rationale behind it is that you increase your surface area. Because think about it, going from here to here, if it was straight, you would just go this distance, as opposed to look at this. Woo! It's a much longer distance in terms of getting from point A to point B when you have these invagination or folds. Right, so the stomach layer, it does have all of these folds, and I to maximize the absorption. And of course, you do have the gastric pits, which have the parietal cells, as we mentioned, and the gastric gland. We mentioned the parietal cells, very important in terms of secreting the acid, which activates pepsinogen. And pepsinogen is critical because pepsinogen in the active form converts into pepsin, and pepsin is able to break down proteins into amino acids, which could then be absorbed. All right, so we mentioned that. So we mentioned the stomach in terms of the acid, it denatures or breaks down the proteins. We mentioned the effect of the acid on pepsinogen, converting it to the active form, and pepsinogen cuts it up. It acts like a scissor, cuts up the proteins into stretches of peptides or stretches of amino acids, which could then readily be absorbed. So within the stomach itself, as we know, you have this motility, right? And it squishes things back and forth, right? To ensure that the contents are well mixed up. That's very important where that is concerned. And as we just mentioned as well, in terms of within the small intestine, you do have these folds. And again, this increases the surface area. The small intestine of itself, made up of 3 areas, the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, right? DJI. And this is the small intestine as it goes down. Of course, it goes from the small intestine to the large intestine via the ileocecal valve, right? It gets into the large intestine, it moves up the large intestine, right, until it comes to the anus itself. So again, similar to the stomach, you do have these folds, mucosal folds, and you have microvilli present on these cells themselves, and this aids in the absorption within the small intestine. Here we have pancreas. As we mentioned, pancreas has a dual function. It secretes digestive enzymes as well as secreting hormones, important hormones which are secreted, right, by the, which are secreted, of course, is insulin. Very important. Insulin is critical for the regulation of blood sugar. It allows sugars to be absorbed by the cells within the body itself. Here is the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas shown in section again. Liver, as mentioned, critical for the absorption of fat, very important throughout the body in terms of the mobility or the movement of fat throughout the body itself. Gallbladder has bile. Bile is very important in terms of breaking down lipids and also for the creation of chylomicrons, which facilitate the transport of fats throughout the body as well. So this is very important in terms of this setup here. And this is just showing the structures associated with these organs. They do have, in terms of the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, they do have, from the liver, you have the common hepatic duct. The gallbladder empties into the common bile duct. And then you have the hepatopancreatic ampulla in terms of the pancreas emptying into that. And of course, all of these things feed into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. So here, this is just showing histologically, well, they're not histological pictures, but cartoons showing what you will see in terms of sections of the liver itself. All right. So in the small intestines, it's showing what you do have happening, right? From the stomach, here you have the polysaccharides, starches, for instance, and they are broken down, polysaccharides into disaccharides, and then you do have them being broken down as well into monosaccharides. These monosaccharides are then absorbed via the brush border, and then they via carrier proteins, they go into the bloodstream. So now these nutrients then go to the hepatic portal vein, right, up until the liver itself. Huh. Okay, good. Now we come to the large intestine. That's the small intestine. Large intestine, very important. Metabolism occurs there. It produces vitamin K, something which we cannot synthesize, and it guards against infection. And they digest mucin and absorb carbohydrate and protein. Now, very important, the functions of this bacteria found in the colon. Cannot emphasize that enough. And this is known, for instance, you might have seen this, you know, on the TV. This is a big area now in terms of what happens to the colonic bacteria in terms of what is known as the microbiome. You might hear that, which refers to collectively all of the bacteria present in the gut. And it is very important. And in fact, right now, as you see here, it mentioned guard against infection. So even now in a time of COVID, what they are recognizing is that one of the ways to treat COVID is to treat your colonic bacteria well. And when you treat those bacteria well, they, in fact, what it has been found, they instruct the immune system to do its job properly. So if you have a healthy gut bacteria set, you will in fact be healthy, right? So that's another way in terms of attacking or looking at a treatment regimen for COVID, as opposed to, yes, granted, you do have the vaccines, you would have medications coming in, but another way to treat it is to treat your gut properly, gut bacteria properly. And one of the ways to do that, as we look at, we mentioned, in fact, the role of fruit, the importance of fruit, notwithstanding that, is to eat local fruits from wherever you are, whichever place you call, quote unquote, home. That is important, to eat the local foods which are present there. So let's say here in Trinidad and Tobago, right, what are some of the fruits you could eat here? What are some of the fruits that are indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago? We'll start here and then move outward. Anybody? What fruits you have down here?
Coconut.
That pineapple. Actually, pineapple is not indigenous to Trinidad, you know, it's actually from Hawaii originally. I don't know if you mentioned pineapple.
So I said pomerac.
My bad, I apologize. Pomerac, as far as I know, yep. Yes.
So pawpaw.
Pawpaw, yes, as far as I know. Yes, yes, yes.
So fat pork.
Fat pork, yes, yes, yes. I know you're talking about is a fruit that's white, yeah, a very white
Yeah.
interior.
Yeah.
It have this one that is called, what is called, Rambagan or Rambagon. It looks like a pomsite, a red pomsite.
Yeah.
But what's the name of
Rambatan, I
it?
think. Rambatan or something. Is the name of it,
Rambatan.
sir.
Somebody help me out with the pronunciation.
Rambutan.
Rambajan, thank you.
Rambutan.
Rangatang.
Rangatang.
Yes, my boyfriend. I
Rambutan.
correct my rangatang.
Rangotang.
Rambutan.
So that what it is called
Rambutan.
it.
Yeah.
But anyhow, it looks like a pomsite seed that red. And when you break it open, it looks like a chenet and it's very sweet.
Yes, it's real good.
Eat it. If you could find it, I know it might be a little bit costly, eat it. That is very good for your immune system, right? It will, particularly now in the time of COVID. Yeah, rambutan or rambujan or, but you know what I'm talking about, the arrow fruit. Right? But all of those fruits very important because the bacteria, it keeps them healthy. And as I said, what has been shown, those bacteria actually instruct the cells of the immune system. It tells them what to do. So when they are unhealthy, you will be unhealthy, right? So very important, feed your gut bacteria and you will be healthy by extension. That is important. All right, so fats is usually is a challenge to absorb, and what the body has done in terms of getting around that, because sometimes in terms of absorbing, because of its very nature, they are large. As we saw with the triglycerides, they are very large, and you don't to break down is a little tricky. So how the body has gotten around that is that it will absorb the fat through the lymphatic system. Because the lymphatic system, in terms of entry into the lymphatic system, when you look at the capillary network, let's say around the gut, small intestine, and stomach, particularly small intestine, right? The capillaries, in terms of entry of the fats or lipids into there, is difficult because the spaces between the cells of the capillaries is not very large. However, the spaces within the lymphatic cells of the lymphatic system, they are a little broader. So what the body does, it will take in those fats via lacteals in the lymphatic system, little spaces, and it'll take them in, and then it will deposit it into the bloodstream. So that is one mechanism in terms of how adaptation occurs. So here you see it doesn't get into the capillaries, they absorb via lacteals, which are spaces in the lymphatic system, and then they are deposited into the bloodstream for carriage to different parts of your body, as we mentioned before. All right, we're almost through there. Here we are down at we have 5 more slides, the large intestine. So we mentioned duodenum, jejunum, ileum, that's the small intestine. Now via the ileocecal valve, because of the fact the ileum and the cecum, which is the last part of the large intestine, so hence this is called the ileocecal duct or valve in terms of emptying here. And now it goes via the ascending colon, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. Because of the shape, it looks like a sigmoid, something like a reverse S, right? So sigmoid, colon, and then of course you have into the rectum and ultimately into the anus where stools are expelled into your toilet. So very importantly, in terms of healthy stools, what you would look for is floating stools. Stools which float nicely, very similar to, let's say, a raft or a boat on the water. That is what you're looking for. Stools which stick on to the side of the bowls and, screeching down, moving slowly down, or which have a shiny appearance, could indicate too much oils, all right? So that could point an issue with your gallbladder, because they are important for emulsification of fats. All right, so watery stools, as we mentioned before, that could point to something wrong as it relates to the microbiome or the bacteria which are present symbiotically in the large intestine. So all of these things, in terms of examination of stools, you could tell, a lot about, well, not a lot, but you could give certain rudimentary diagnoses associated with the GI tract. Of course, bloody stools would indicate or could indicate something, of course, wrong with certain parts of the GI tract, and sometimes it could point towards cancer as well, So they always take an important stool, looking at your stools and identifying these issues. They are important. All right, so now we're coming to the enteric nervous system, right? So this is just showing in terms of stimuli. Let me see if I jumped ahead. Okay, right. So you have the enteric nervous system. This all gets you ready, gets the stomach ready, gets the whole GI tract ready. So here you have chemicals in terms of the stimuli. Sometimes it could be smells, right? And then which leads to distension of certain organs. And then you have receptors, both mechanical and chemoreceptors located in the stomach. This tells you, of course, mechanoreceptors, stretch receptors, they tell you if the stomach is full. Chemoreceptors tell you, of course, what is actually located in there. And this could be a stimulus if something is wrong. If you take in something which does not quite agree with you, the chemoreceptors, they do send signals via the sensory nerves to the central nervous system. And then you could have regurgitation, right? Or sometimes, quick regurgitation, which we commonly call vomit or emesis, vomiting occurring. When you have emesis, where you have a quick regurgitation, a reversal of the normal passage of food towards the stomach. And when we looked at, the peristaltic movement, in essence, emesis is really a reversal of that. So from the stomach is reversed, and you quickly get this egestion of things from your stomach because clearly you're taking in something which the body perceives as being harmful. So with the cephalic phase, right, sometimes you see, smell, you could just see something. So explain to me, what happens when you see, for me, if you see doubles and you smell kuchila, what happens? What happens when you smell? Oh, I'm making you hungry. Well, we finishing just now. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a wrong one time. That's a bad. That's probably a bad example. But what happens when you smell kuchila? Your mouth is out of water, yeah? Well, at least for me, something about that smell. And I only get it, I think, with kuchila, that's my mouth's out of water one time. So it's getting in preparation. Or even you see certain foods, your mouth's out of water, so it's getting in preparation. Within your stomach, right, they begin to secrete gastric juices, right? And all of these things are in preparation for the food that is coming in. And of course, now, once it does come in terms of the gastric phase, you have the actual parietal cells, chief cells, and different cells. They're now secreting their contents, and then you have motility occurring within the stomach that causes, the breaking up of the food itself. Then, of course, you move on to the intestinal phase where the chyme moves into the small intestine. And then you have the breaking up, or the digestion, of fats, acids, and glucose. And this just shows the cycle which occurs within them, which relates to fats, proteins, and secretion of acids within the stomach itself. All right. So what we have looked at there in totality, we looked at the taking in of food, and we look at the composition of certain foods and how they are broken down. We also mentioned in terms of the movement of food through the GI tract from mouth to anus. We looked at different organs and their contribution to the digestive process. All right. So all of these things collectively critical, and what they allow us to do is to digest foods. And there's once they're digested, we're able to extract nutrients, and these nutrients ultimately lead to ATP production. And this ATP, as we mentioned previously, this is the unit of energy which we need for everything within the body itself. All right. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me see if I could pause for a cause, and I'll take in any questions. Pause recording.